Welcome to Backstage Church. We're just real people having real conversation. I'm Nick.
I'm Chris.
I'm Calvin.
And we are talking about love. We're going through 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Check out the last video if you haven't yet, because we were talking about how love was patient and love was kind. And this week we're going to talk more about...
Hang on, there's more. Like, love is patient, love is kind, but there's more to love than just those two qualities?
Yes.
I'm ready.
Yes, there's more.
Cool.
Because if you read that chapter, it does not envy, it does not boast, and it is not proud. So we're dealing with what love is not.
Well, what is envy, though, guys?
Well, envy is the same thing as jealousy, right? There's no difference?
Well, I have to disagree, because God is jealous,
good.
and if God's good, then jealousy should be different than envy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final answer.
Bible answer. That's the
Bible
That's the answer that's in the Bible that doesn't have any real context or
You're
weight.
right. So I was reading the scripture in the New Living, and the New Living does say love is not jealous, but I know other translations say envy, and I think envy is definitely the correct translation because, like you said, God is a jealous God, and God does not sin. Therefore, jealousy cannot be a sin. But we know envy is a sin. So that's where I want to start. What is the difference between jealousy and envy?
Wow, that's a good question, man. It really is. Because honestly, I think the two of them, they don't necessarily go hand in hand, but one leads to the other.
Yeah.
I think when you're jealous of somebody, it's usually in the context of they've got something you want, they are something that you're not. They're going places that you feel like you don't have the ability to, and so therefore it puts you in a state of mind where you begin to crave what they have, which is envy. So jealousy will always, when it's taken to its natural conclusion, always leads to envy, because then you begin to put yourself. Because then when you begin to envy, once you get there, then it becomes very easy to take that next step. Well, if they weren't in the way, then I could have what they've got.
Okay.
At least that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. No, I was to have envy for me is really a lot along with what you're saying, is that you are so much into what you don't have. You're so much into what they have that you want it for yourself so badly that you are willing to actually get them out of the way for it. You're actually able to whether it's physical or you're just going to slowly start trying to take the things from them, steal from them. They have more than enough, so I can just take this. And I think that is where we get into envy, because we're not even appreciating them in the work that they put into to make that.
Yeah. I've always kind of thought of it as, God is a jealous God, as in, like, he wants us for himself. He wants to possess us. And so when our affections start getting swayed by the things of this world, well, he's jealous of that. He wants to have all of us, and like that's a good thing, right? If I was in a relationship, I would want all of her affections, and she should have all of mine, and she would be right to be jealous if I'm giving my affections away to somebody else. But to be envious, that's there is a difference, right? Envy is looking at you, Nick, and seeing what you have with your wife and your children, and I could be envious, kind of say, I have to have, I want what Nick has, and then I could try to take it from you, which wouldn't go over well. That would be a problem.
No, you probably wouldn't survive, but that's a whole nother thing.
A whole different thing, right? But to say love does not envy, love protects, love cares, love, I want all of your affections, but I'm not envious over it. I'm not going to look at what you have as my brother. I'm not going to look at what you have and then try to take it for myself, because that's a godly love. I love you, therefore I'm going to celebrate with you over what you have and not become envious and just be selfish and wish that it was for myself, or try to take it from you, or try to take from the joy that you're having and whatever victory you're experiencing.
I think it's kind of the older brother syndrome. We talked about the prodigal son. I think it was our last thing we talked about. We dealt with that a little bit and dealing with the love aspect. But the older brother, all he was able to see was what he didn't have, rather than all the things he did have. And that's why his daddy rebuked him. You know, his brother came home, man. He'd been, you really want to go out and live in the pigsty and eat pig slop and you know, basically, you know, do all that? Is that really what you want? Because that's what this guy had to go through, and then come back and humble himself to get his father's not to get his father's affection, but for him to grasp.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with the father. The father didn't change.
Right.
You know, he never changed. It was the prodigal had to change his heart, but it was the older brother who came out and said, what is the deal? You never gave me a party so we could party.
Right.
You never killed a fatted calf so me and my friends could party, and you've never given me, I have slaved for you all these years. And that is what always leads to that thing of jealousy. That you begin to look at not at what you have, not in what you've been blessed with. You start focusing on what somebody else has and I've never got. And honestly, can I just say something today?
Yeah.
All the cancel culture that's going on today and a lot of this junk that's happening in our world is pure and flat out. It is the big brother syndrome.
Yeah.
Everybody is wanting to say, hey, I never got that. How come they get it and I don't get it? Which is the root of envy. It's not about you have it and I don't.
Yeah.
It's about how come you got it and I didn't get it, which then leads to a whole, it leads from envy, which is jealousy of it, and then it goes all the way into, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, because the thing of it is, when you envy and you get something out of envy, now you got to try to boast to make yourself sound better and bigger than what you are.
Yeah.
And that's just how which leads to total pride at that point.
Yeah.
And so that whole thing, I think they go right together. It's not this it's a sequence of that happens, I think.
So yeah, there's a lot of interconnectivity happening here. And just as you were talking, envy and boasting, it almost kind of sounds like two sides of the same coin, because envy could lead to you boasting, but your boasting could make someone else envy. And not that you're going to make somebody sin, but, love doesn't envy. Like, I'm not going to be envious of what you have or what you're accomplishing, but at the same time, you're not going to boast about what the good things that are happening in your life. You're not going to intentionally try and stir up negative emotions in me, because why? Because we love each other. That's what love does.
Well, I think it's very, very interesting, because when we talk about that, one of the things that you had mentioned a little bit before, PK, is that the older brother did not take into account what the younger brother had to go through to get where he got. And a lot of times in our culture, we become envious over somebody else, but we never are able to do. We don't understand, or we're not willing to do what they had to go through to get that.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for joining us today on Backstage Church.
Dude,
that was so good.
That was awesome, man.
Even Paul said, imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promise. So, we're supposed to be able to imitate. There is a sense where I feel like jealousy is more than okay. It's necessary, because we demonize looking at someone saying, oh, I want that. We always want to say, oh, you're looking at the land of Ur. You want bigger, you want better. But I want the faith that you have, PK. Now, I don't want to go through all the things you went through, but understanding how you've had to walk through it. And I'm not going to go and say, oh, well, I don't understand why PK has his faith. I should have a better faith. I should then go through and emulate the life that he has that was able to get that faith.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, that is so good.
Just like having funds, having money. Emulate those people who have money, and how do they actually spend money, which is not usually on the cars or the clothes that everyone thinks that they do. While it's on a Christian book, The Millionaire Next Door is a really good example that there's a lot of people who their net worth is a lot, but they still live very reasonably. They live comfortably. They live knowing, hey, while we have this money, that's not what the money is for. It's money set aside for something else. So I think going through that.
That is such a great point, right? Should truly celebrate somebody and their success. We do sometimes look at somebody and think, I want what they have, but I don't want to go through what they went to get it. But
Bingo.
My mind immediately goes to Simon Cowell. I remember watching him on some show that he was judging a long time ago, like 10 or 15 years ago. But he was talking with one of the contestants, and they were talking about how they were genuinely happy for someone else's success. And Simon, he just immediately said, no, you're not. And he started saying that nobody is genuinely happy for someone else's success. They want that success for themselves. And it just in his worldview at that time, maybe he doesn't hold this anymore, I don't know. But at that time, he genuinely could not understand someone who was happy for someone else's success that they didn't have themselves. It didn't compute with his worldview and his mindset. And, I just think, he had a very more of an envious mindset. And, if someone's, it's just, he wasn't going to celebrate someone else's. And I just think love is going to celebrate someone else's success. If you're accomplishing something, if something good's happening for you, because I love you, I'm going to celebrate with you. I'm going to rejoice with you. I'm not going to try to tear you down or make you feel less good about it. Because why? That's what love does.
Well, and the thing with envy is the aspect of, look at what I don't have. Mm-hmm. And pride is, look at what I do have.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that no matter what you do have, there's always going to be somebody else that's got more.
Yeah.
And so you tend to, even though you tend to focus on what I don't have more than what God has blessed me with, so you're always looking at, well, God, how come I don't?
Yeah.
How come I don't have? How come, and as the old saying goes, when you're willing to do what that other person did to get where they're at and get what they've got, then you'll begin to walk in that place.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's amazing how that people will then justify. James talks about the different levels of sin and how that the different things. And it's interesting in Hebrew culture, sin wasn't just an immediate event; it was a process that took place. First of all, your eye hooks to something that it shouldn't.
Yeah.
And whatever your eye hooks to, it gets magnified. Have you ever known somebody that gets obsessed with something? Mm-hmm. It could be another individual. It could be with material things. It could be with money. It could be with prominence in the church. Their eye gets hooked on something, and it gets bigger than they are, and all they can see is that thing. And then it says that once that happens, that then you begin to rationalize why the rules don't apply to you, why the boundaries don't matter to you, why they don't, they're not the same for me as they are for other people.
Right.
And as soon as you do that, the next step is you then think it's okay to cross that boundary. It's okay for me to do that. And that's basically what's happening here. Mm-hmm. The idea of envying, the idea of boasting, and it goes right down to it. And Nick, it's like you said, everybody wants the money, but there's very few people that are willing to put forth the effort that it takes.
The effort and the risk.
Yes.
Right. I mean, for anything that anyone has, there was a risk that was involved in getting that. So no one wants to give up. I think that's when we go into the rich young ruler, where Jesus says this famous, it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to inherit the kingdom. Because he's telling a rich guy, in order to inherit eternal life, in order to do more, give everything that you have and give that all to the poor. And in the idea, it always confused me because I'm like, that makes no sense to me. Like, this guy probably worked hard for what he got, and now got something to give it all up. But the whole idea in that mindset is, if he is going to want to have what Jesus has, what the disciples has, then he's going to have to actually live the life that they're living, which was of non-material.
Yep.
And it's hard too, because the rich young ruler, it's not like he was a heathen or a sinful man. Jesus, gave him accolades. Like, you live by the law. You're a good man. But there's one thing you haven't done, which is sell all your possessions and give to the poor. And he went away so sad because he had a lot of possessions. And I just think I think it probably maybe speaks to even his generosity, because I believe that this is true. We all think, well, if I had that, I would be generous. But the more you have, the harder it is to be generous. Even when it comes to
Yep.
tithing, right? Like it's pretty easy to tithe on $100. It's not super challenging necessarily to tithe on $1,000, but you get $100,000 like at one time. What a crazy thing to happen! Are you gonna write that check for $10,000? That's a whole lot more challenging. Than so the greater the scale, the harder it is to be generous. And I just think, when it comes to life, when it comes to loving people, right, and it comes to following Jesus, the more you have at stake, the more you have to sacrifice, the more challenging it becomes to actually commit to it and do the things that is expected of us as believers. And I think maybe that's why God isn't as quick to bless financially or bless in certain areas. We all have things that we're wanting God to bless and God to increase in our lives, but are we willing to sacrifice? With greater blessing comes greater sacrifice and greater requirements of us. So, are we willing to actually step up in those areas?
Well, I just find it funny or interesting because when we look at envy, boast, and pride, literally all three of those result in the lack of patience and kindness.
Whoa. Okay.
You got it. Yeah, that's good.
Usually when we don't have those, we start to envy. When we get what we have, we start boasting what we have over somebody else. And we start filling ourselves with pride or false humility, which really is pride, just clothed in humility in a false sense of that. But really, when we don't have those and we're not patient to be able to persevere with what we have, and to get what we're supposed to be going for, we're going to end up with those three other things. So it's funny because that's very much in the Hebrew culture where you're really trying to see the both sides as they write things, and you can see while Paul is writing in Greek so they would understand that Hebrew culture-ness comes out and says, well, it's these things and it's not those things.
One of the qualities I think of when I think of someone who genuinely loves another person, they listen to them. They really listen to them. They care about what they have to say. But if you're all pent up with envy over somebody, well, you're not going to listen to them because all you're feeling is these negative feelings towards them, and you don't care what they have to say. You just want them, just to be quiet, leave you alone, and get away from you so you can stop feeling envious of them and those negativity. If you're boastful or prideful, and you're talking to someone who you see as less than you, well, you don't care what they have to say because they can't add value to your life because you have more than them. And so, wow, I love that you're, though you making those two as the opposite of the other two.
Well, it's interesting too that, and this comes from our good friend Shane Willard, that in Jewish culture in Hebrew, the word righteous was the Hebrew word sadak, but the word righteousness is the word sadaka, which really means generosity. So what it had to do with was that your righteousness wasn't right or wrong that you did or didn't do. Righteousness was more about your generosity to others. What you did, how you dealt with that finances, and it doesn't just, we think about finances so much, but really when you think about how, let's be honest, we've all probably had times where we've been praying and seeking God for an answer to something and really praying and everything, and it just doesn't seem to happen, and we've been fasting for weeks and all this kind of stuff, and you see somebody else, they get prayed for, they pray one time and that are needing a similar type of thing, and they get it immediately.
Yeah.
Now, tell me it doesn't get hard not to be envious of that and say, God, what's wrong with me? Am I just chopped liver?
Yeah.
I've been praying for years for that, God, and nothing. They go down first time, and whatever the case may be. And then that leads to the opposite thing of that. We have to be very, very careful that when God does answer a prayer, it ain't because of your righteousness. It's not because of you're a better Christian than somebody else. It's all about the grace of God. So I think what Paul is talking about, love is calling us to be even keeled. It's calling us to be, just remember that where they are now, you once were, or you could be in their place. So you need to rejoice with those who rejoice, and you need to be sorrowful with those who are sorrowful. And I think if we do that, then that kind of takes it all away from the boasting side of things.
Now, I love the illustration that you used. Someone who receives something that like, immediately that you've been praying for and longing for, and the natural inclination is going to be that envy. It's going to pop up, and I would contend it's not even wrong that pops up. Well, now, what is wrong is what you do with it, because in that moment, something within you has been revealed. And now you have a choice. Yeah. Are you going to dwell on that? Are you going to lean into that and add fuel to that emotion that's going to lead into sin? Or are you going to begin to pray for them and out loud start saying, Lord, I feel envious of them, but I'm going to celebrate with them and just begin to verbalize how you want to feel. And, we have that choice. And a lot of times we tend to be driven by those emotions, and we forget that we have a choice to fuel it or to renounce it.
Yeah, it's
not easy.
And it is. I mean, so many times we think of we think of the gifts of the Spirit, we think of the love of God, we think of this stuff that we just sit there and God just dumps it on us.
Yeah.
And we forget that most of the stuff that he's talking about here is just the product of a constant working out of things in our lives, a constant thing of putting other people ahead of ourselves, a constant thing of coming to the knowledge that we're not all that,
right?
And that there, but for the grace of God, go we or go I. That the Lord is so good to us, and that that. And when we think about it, most of the time, I mean, let's be honest. Most of the time we think about, God, you never did this, or God, how come they got that? Or God, we fail to remember the goodness of God. We fail to go back and remember, wow, that, God, you were all so awesome to me then. And I think that kind of keeps us in a place of equilibrium. I'm not saying we shouldn't desire more of God. That's not what I'm saying, or that we shouldn't, seek Him for His goodness, His grace, His blessing in our lives and everything like that. I pray for my kids and grandkids for the blessing of God to be on their lives. I don't want them to have to go through some of the stuff I went through. I don't want them to have, there's a lot of stuff I do want them to go through because it builds perseverance and character and all those kind of good things. But I think the whenever we start envying, we think of envy as being what I don't have, but a lot of times envying is more of that stuff that it becomes God. What we start to accuse God. You know what I'm saying? We start to accuse God, and I think we start walking down, because if we can accuse God, then we can accuse His creation, because He's the creator of everything. And, oh God, you've had it out for me all my life, that type of stuff. Wow. And which you see characters in the Bible who thought that, and it never ended well for them. It just didn't. So,
yeah,
it's so interesting when you look at the trying to get what someone else has when they don't. But even on the flip side, when you are trying to this is something that more conservatives have an issue with is less of trying to say I need to have what they have and it's not fair that they have it. And on the flip side, it's more look at what I've built up and done myself, and you just haven't done anything. You aren't, and going into the boastful side of things of all of being the self-made man. Well, no man is really self-made.
That's right.
There's always somebody, something that has helped them out to get to where they were at and where they are, and that's the other side of you have envy, but then also you have boasting and boastfulness, and really when you start doing that and you start trying to minimize what people are, someone, how do you do this? Well, I just pray to God 30 minutes a day. Well,
yeah.
Hold on, you've done more than just that. It's, well, it might have been praying to God 30 minutes a day. Well, how do you pray? How do you prepare yourself for prayer? And even just trying to helping the other person understand, like, hey, I know it's not easy. Praying to God 30 minutes a day, like truly, honestly, get on your face and praying genuinely for 30 minutes, that's tough.
Yeah.
Half the reason my prayer time is as long as it is because I get distracted, and so I need more time to accommodate my distraction. Let's be honest, okay?
Yeah, it's the whole thing, and we gotta going back to the context of this chapter, sandwiched in between 1 Corinthians 12, where he talks about the gifts of the Spirit, spiritual gifts, and 14, where he talks about the proper use of the spiritual gifts. And sandwiched in between there is this thing of, look, you ain't all that in a bag of chips because you can speak in tongues or prophesy or see miracles, and you're not this dirty, rotten scum of a sinner if you can't do those things. And just remember that all of those things are flowing from the Father, and he and the reality is none of us own a spiritual gift. The fact is, Paul says the proper use is that in the moment, in the need where you're at, you allow the gift for that need to come out, whether that be encouragement, prophecy, whatever the case may be. Like if I get hit by a car out here on the street, I don't need somebody to come and prophesy over me. I need somebody with the ministry of laying out of hands and raise me up. You know what I mean? So and that's what he says. Seek earnestly the best gifts. There is no hierarchy of gifts. There is a gift that is given in due season for a particular time and moment. And I think that's where the boasting and the envy will just mess you up big time, because when you try to mix those two with anything doing spiritual stuff, you're asking for trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think even for non-spiritual stuff, just in general life. Like I think Paul, it's really funny because a lot of times we try to over-spiritualize this chapter and we use it in weddings all the time and make it this big lovey-dovey thing. But there's the practicalness of it is really love is also leadership.
Yeah.
Like this is all about, if you're a leader, you're not going to go and boast over the person or be envious of the people who are underneath you saying, oh, I should have that or I should, do that, and vice versa, looking up into leadership. It shouldn't be, well, I don't see why they're the leader. They made the wrong decision. Well, I mean, it's easy to armchair quarterback anything. But trying to actually, understand, trying to not envy their position or boast about how much better than they do.
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point. We need to honor leadership, and we all say we honor leadership. Oh, we honor the position, we honor the person in leadership, but does honor really begin until you really have a sharp disagreement with them? That's when the true test of honor begins. But I love what you're saying about reaching out and meeting needs for people. I think it's really easy to kind of take this self-righteous approach when you see someone struggling with something, especially if it's an area that you don't struggle with. And it's just like, well, you really just need to pray and just, to over-spiritualize this. Well, you really need to pray. And if you would just pray more, you wouldn't be dealing with this. And, sometimes the right thing to do is instead of, and that is kind of a boastful position. I conquered this just by praying. Why are you so spiritually weak? Really, though, sometimes the right thing to do is say, hey, let me walk through this with you. Let me come down off of my just prayer. Let me get in this with you. Let me pray with you. Yeah. And let's talk about practically how can I work with you in this to help you overcome this or to help you grow in this area. And sometimes people have a real practical need, and it's not just a spiritual thing. And love is going to get in there with them. Love isn't just going to give them a how-to manual. Love is going to say, hey, let's do this together. Let's overcome this. I'm in this with you.
Yep, that's so good, Chris. I was just looking at in chapter 14, peeking ahead.
Whoa, spoilers.
And verse 12, Paul makes this. He says, since, and you can hear the tongue in cheek as he said, since you are so eager to have spiritual gifts, why don't you just try to excel in the gifts that build up the other person?
Yes.
And I think that's what the thing, when you're worried about boasting and envying and all the stuff that goes in there, you're more worried about yourself than you are about somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Jesus has called us to. He's called us to look to the needs of others. He's called us to lift the other person up. He's called us to honor the other person above ourselves. Yeah. And look out for the well-being of the other person. And I think that when we do that, like you said, it's not, well, dude, man, I got over that 15 years ago. What's up with you, Instead of doing that, doing what you said, say, man, I'm sorry you're dealing with that. I'm sorry that I've dealt with some stuff like that. Can I pray with you? Mm-hmm. Can I be there for you, or whatever the case may be? And then not doing stuff around that person that's going to put them in a place where they're going to be tempted to fall back into old methods and old ways of doing stuff. Yeah. So I think from that standpoint, Paul in this little chapter of 13 verses, man, he has sandwiched so much truth that applies to everything.
So true.
And once again, when we get back to Jesus saying, "By this will all men know that you're my disciples, by your love one for another." He gives no other standard.
Yeah.
By your love one for another. That's how they'll know. And so I think that more than anything else, is where it's at.
And again, not to take this in a totally different direction, but when the people of God are known in the world by all these other things that are not love for one another, it's time for us to really take a look at who we are as a
That's
people
good, man.
and how we're representing Jesus.
That's right.
And really evaluate, what are we known by? Are we known by love? If not, we've got some work to do.
That's good, man. Real good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You can comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. Comment. Let us know. Subscribe if this has been very helpful for you. And then if you want to hear more as we continue diving into this chapter, click on the notification bell so you don't miss it when the video goes up. So thank you so much. And while we're at it, just make sure you guys love one another.
There you go. Have a good one.